Leadville Race Day is ever so close, so we wanted to get in at least one more episode before you line it up at 6th and Harrison. This episode will focus on momentum, how to keep your speed up even when the course tries to slow you down. We have a veteran of the race who will help us find the racing line and explain how it can help you save time no matter your ability. We also answer some last-minute listener questions, so let's go.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano, the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I am Michael Hottie, Hottie to most. The big training, the most important training, is hopefully done. From a climbing aspect, there are probably no more gains to be had. Coach Cody, who outlined our Leadville taper, told us how we continue to do some intensity during this period, but the real high-stress work is done, and now our bodies are coming to a peak. Your fitness, your nutrition strategy, your bike setup, we're going to assume, for this show at least, you've got that all set. Instead, what we're going to do is focus on some of those areas, those little spots along the course where you might be able to pick up 10, 20, 30 seconds here or there. For the experienced racers, some of the stuff may be pretty basic, but that's okay because we know that the Leadville start line is filled with buckle dreamers who could use these tips. To help us, we have invited back someone who's become a regular about this time of year on the show, and that is Nate Whitman. Nate has seen it all over his 22 finishes. He's barely finished a time. He has raced at the front with top rows, and he's raced with his arm in a brace. Now he's here to help us examine some of Leadville's climbs, descents, and turns as we look for some time savings out on course. All right, we welcome back to the show Nate Whitman. Nate, folks, is a 22-time finisher of the Leadville Trail 100, going for his 23rd this year. He has 4 top 10 overalls at the race. Wow. 3 sub-7-hour finishes. He is on this amazing streak of what? You've got like 13 sub-730s in a row, Nate. That is just amazing. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, Hottie. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back. I feel the energy and all the stoke is very high with the race now, just a shade more than 2 weeks away. So I'm doing fantastic, and I'm impressed with your very accurate rundown of my palmares, as they say in Europe.
Right, and I'm loving the very youthful speak there, Nate. Stoked, you're feeling up for this epic race. That's every mountain biker uses that kind of language, huh?
Well, I think so. As I get on to 22 and now heading for 23 races every year, different things motivate me, and sometimes it's my training, and sometimes it's a goal, sometimes it's some cool new equipment or a new bike or a new wheel set, but a lot of times, and going back to the early days, it's the people and it's the community and it's the vibe in town and it's the weather and the Rocky Mountain High and the other racers, fast, slow, indifferent, and just my love of kind of all things Leadville and the Leadville family. So yeah, feeling really excited.
And it's this time of year, folks. I always have to thank Nate because Nate properly introduced me to Leadville when he was living here in Los Angeles. He was one of the guys at a local shop that he and I both frequented who was introducing new folks to Leadville. This is pre-Lance days, pre-movie days, before it really became the phenomenon it is now. So I always have to thank Nate for that, because without him, this podcast probably wouldn't be happening right now. What we're going to do in this show, folks, is combine some tips on like mountain bike technique and overlay those tips onto a few spots at the Leadville course. This is an area that, Fatty and I have talked about a lot of stuff on this show, climbing and nutrition and all the things you can do to cut major amounts of time. Nate and I are going to dive into the micro a little bit and talk about, proper racing lines and little spots on the course where you can hold speed, hold momentum, and hopefully save a few seconds or maybe even some minutes along the way, which that's what we're getting down to now as we really count down the clock to the shotgun at 6th and Harrison. Is we're just starting to look for just anywhere we can to save some time, which is good. But Nate, you've been in Leadville, as you said. First of all, before we get into the particulars here, you've been on course. Anything you've seen on course this year that you'd like to tell listeners about?
Yeah, Hottie. I am. I'm fortunate that I live now full-time in Colorado, and I get to spend a lot of time in Leadville at altitude and out on course. And I have done a good number of training runs and recon. Nothing massive, but in thinking about it kind of roughly from the start, there's been some pretty significant repaving work. I can't think of the precise number of the county road that sort of leads us out of town down toward the train tracks there in the first 5-10 minutes, but significant repaving of that road. It is brand new, fresh, sparkly black pavement, and you probably would remember that those roads get these horizontal cracks from left to right across the road. And so as you ride down and you're holding speed in a line at 25 or 30, 35 miles an hour, you sort of get this ga-goom, ga-goom, ga-goom. Well, at least temporarily for maybe a mile of the pavement, that's gone. Over the past, it's probably been at least 2 seasons, there has been significant logging and foresting work on the kind of middle and deep parts of the St. Kevin's Road. That continues, but to me, that road has felt smoother and less, some tread marks had kind of gotten embedded 1 or 2 seasons ago. It's still there a bit, but that seems to be going quick. The pavement around Turquoise Lake actually has not been improved, and it seems like each year there are more big potholes and loose spots and stuff, and I kind of was thinking to myself that that's in terms of sort of sneaky spots on course where maybe you let your guard down and something could go wrong, that's one to be aware of. Is yes, it's pavement, yes, it's relatively predictable, but there's probably 4 or 5 spots on the road where there's potholing and kind of gravelly fragments of the insides of the pothole. But what else can I tell you? Otherwise, by my rides and by the rides of friends and training partners and comrades out there, the course appears to be in pretty good shape. It really does. It seems fast. It seems ready to rock. If you had to run the race tomorrow morning, I think people would generally be excited and think it was in good shape and not find too many unpredictable things. And I'll tell you, I say that because that's not always the case. I frequently find myself in June and early July thinking, well, this will be different once the Leadville training camp happens. And then it'll be different once the stage race happens, which as we record is a handful of days away still. And I still think that will hold true. I think the number of bikes and wheels on the terrain will change it a bit, and usually it makes it better. But if they needed to run it tomorrow, I don't think anybody would find anything out of the ordinary.
Excellent. Okay, great. So let's get down to, the theme of this show, and that is helping people find some seconds, maybe a few minutes on course by using good technique, finding good racing lines. And I'll tell you how this idea came to me today. I've been riding with Mrs. Hottie a lot. She's, in fact, she's been training for an event, not Leadville. And we've been up in the Santa Monica Mountains where you're very familiar, right? And she does not have very much experience riding in any type of event. So we've been focusing just on good pacing and good riding. And she does pretty good on the climbs, actually, right? And okay on the descents. But what I've noticed with her, and I think this probably happens with a lot of people, is that where she tends to give up time is, going into a corner, holding speed through a corner, finding a good line, getting her bike going again when she has to slow down or wants to stop. I mean, all those little spots are where she can kind of get gapped rather easy. And I thought, this is probably not too uncommon. Like, this probably happens to a lot of people. They do okay in the straights, and they probably become good climbers over their Leadville training, but there's some little spots where they could do themselves better by tightening things up and cleaning things up. So we're going to walk through little spots on the course, you and I, Nate, and try to help people find some racing lines using technique and so forth. And I want to start with actually the first kind of feature of the morning, and that's St. Kevin's. And as folks climb the last little section of that, right, we've got that steep pitch that that takes us to that left-hander, and you see a lot of people losing speed kind of right in that area. What kind of advice would you give people about the better racing line up there and how to kind of keep speed on what is a pretty slow section of the course?
Yeah, Hottie, I think this is really smart. I think it impacts all racers from the fastest to folks just trying to make the 12-hour mark. At the end of the day, a key stat when you come across the line is your average speed, and all of these things can impact what is that average speed. And I think there's a tendency in big marquee events like Leadville to put so much focus into the obvious challenges. You got to climb Columbine, you got to climb Powerline, you got to descend. There's an obvious focus on the obvious spots, which the flip side of that coin is there can be a tendency to kind of check out mentally or not properly reflect the importance of just holding your speed, holding your momentum, and finding every which way possible to keep that average speed as high as it can be, and that's going to determine your finishing time. In terms of St. Kevin's, you're right. I think the challenge of St. Kevin's is it's really irregular and undulating, and of course it's steep and hard, and it's early in the morning, and it's the beginning of the day, and there's a lot of riders and racers around you. But it really is quite varied, and it has steep pitches and it has flat areas, and it even has little humps that kind of give you a little bit of boost to go downhill for 3, 4, 5 seconds and up the other side. So it's a great place to think about this. At that top left-hand turn, which is sort of the end of the steepest piece of St. Kevin's, I think what you definitely don't want to do is lose traction and stall out and have to get off your bike. For me, when I've ridden it, I've found that the best way to do that is to take a really wide approach to the turn, to take some of the bite and gradient out of it. And in this case, since it's turning left, you'd want to be as far wide to the right of the turn and come around that side as possible. The other thing that's a little bit mentally challenging there, even for me after all these years, is I do sort of mentally picture that as a spot to maybe take the foot off the gas for a second or catch my breath. And you actually continue climbing, with the exception of maybe 5, 6, 7 seconds of a little bit of a downgrade. You continue climbing for several minutes from that standpoint. So I would encourage folks to try to keep their momentum, come around far out wide to the right, hold your speed like you see the Tour de France riders, taking more toward the center or the outside of the switchback, hold their momentum, give it a good few pedal strokes on the down, and then maybe catch your breath. That if we talked about every section of the course, Hottie, that would be a theme I would keep repeating, which is you work so hard to kind of get over these rises and get to the top of a certain grade that the first instinct can be to just pause and take a breath and stop pedaling even at the top. I would say go ahead and stop pedaling, but take 3, 4, 5, 6 good, strong pedal strokes to get you over the top and bring up that average speed as you go down the backside. And that's something that can be on St. Kevin's outbound, but it really applies in lots of areas of the course.
Right, yeah. And for folks that are starting in white and brown corral, they may see more traffic than Nate's going to see, or anybody in red or silver or gold are going to see. But still, I think the same idea applies. As you start to go up that steepest portion of Kevin's, in this case, that's our use case here, you want to try to, if you can, favor that right side, even early in that steep portion. So once you get to the top of it, you're already on the racing line, Nate's recommended racing line here, and you're not going to slingshot your way around it because it's just too steep and slow, but much easier to hold momentum. And then once you crest the top of that thing, try to keep some force on the pedals so you keep that momentum going. And then as things start to level out, maybe you can take your breath there. That's a great tip to have. I know I've messed that thing up. I've been too far on the inside, and then you get it to the top of it and you're trying to turn your bike around a tighter corner, and that's just a momentum loser there. And Nate, I think the same idea could probably be applied to that Hagerman's to Sugarloaf turn, which is much tighter. Now it's flatter. There's not the severe incline, but again, the racing line is probably out to the right? And you want to take it nice and wide and then come into that rocky Sugarloaf climb. Kind of the same idea there, right?
I agree with that. Depending on what type of a pace and speed overall rider you are and where you sort of fall in the pack, another thing is just to remember you're going to have to brake.
Yeah.
Because, folks who maybe aren't quite as familiar with the course, as I approach that, I pretty precisely know exactly when that left-hand turn is going to come and exactly when I need to brake. But folks that are just thrilled to be riding along in a line of 8 or 10 or 12 riders and making good time may not have the precision to know, God, I've only got about another 300 meters and I got to think about braking. So you got to remember to think about braking. As with all things, shift early, make your downshift into an easy gear, maybe even air to the side of easier than you're going to need. It's much easier and less energy expenditure to shift to an easier gear sooner and then notch it up, as opposed to rounding the corner, finding you're actually 2 or 3 ticks too hard. Then all of a sudden you're trying to downshift under power. You could drop your chain. You could have a shifting problem. You just burn out your legs. So yeah, I agree. Wide around the outside right of that to make that hard left-hand turn. And the other thing nice there is, and I have a lot of mantras I tell myself in all forms of racing, but one of the things I try to repeat is just eyes, meaning vision, meaning actually to look, despite the fatigue, despite the lack of oxygen and the racing heart rate, to look ahead and think about, what line do I want to take? Where am I aiming? And in that particular spot, you go from a wide, 2-3 car widths wide, relatively smooth dirt forest road to, at best, in that beginning section, you could call it a really rocky double track Jeep road. So take a wide turn, put your eyes ahead and up, think about where you want to point that front tire.
Okay, then you're going to obviously get up and over power line, folks. We're not going to tell you to be aggressive going down power line if that's not your thing. Be careful up there. It's quite rocky. Either be prepared to pass or be passed. That's kind of the idea, I think, going down power line to make it safe. Out on the road, you're going to hopefully get a little recovery out on the road. And maybe find somebody to work with if you can. That will help you save seconds. Nate, that's going to take us to Outward Bound, and I did want to stop here and just get your thoughts. Now that you've had a year to think about this new section of the course, any note come to mind about Outward Bound you'd like to relay to folks?
I guess the one thing would be, it is more rugged and it is a smaller area, and so coming into that zone, especially on the way out when you're wanting and have the energy to be going a little bit faster, it's a little bit harder to spot crew and maybe a little bit more chance of a mishap in terms of a missed bottle or a dropped bottle or something of that nature. So that was my big takeaway. It felt like it cost me some energy on the way home, and on the way out, I just had to be a little bit more careful and really be aware of my surroundings.
Okay, yeah, it's going to be a little tighter in there as opposed to being out on the road. So there's a need to have your antenna up, be alert, as you're going through Outward Bound, but otherwise it shouldn't be tricky as far as a turning technical standpoint. Which gets us to Pipeline, and this is kind of the one area I really started thinking about as I was exploring this topic and thinking about you, Nate, and that is, Pipeline, I think for most folks is, well, I'm just going to Twin Lakes, right? It seems like outside of Clavicle Hill, it seems like pretty straightforward. Now, there are 2 large switchbacks that start about mile 31, where I think especially somebody in that 10-12 hour range could really kind of toss away some seconds if they're not careful. And I think the areas I'm talking about, Nate. They're long switchbacks with pretty screaming descents and then good turns at the bottom. And you kind of go back up the other side, and there's 2 of them. So tell me about your thoughts and how you would coach somebody, even a slower rider, to make the most out of these sections, to not give away too much time there.
One thing that's critical is just to kind of know they're coming. If you don't know that it's coming, it might be too late to sort of manipulate how you're going to handle it. So that's another spot where just reviewing the course map and maybe making some notes, or if you get a chance to be in town early, go check them out. But in each case on the way outbound, we're talking about big sweeping bends that arc to riders left. And on the way back, they're pretty similar, but they're going to arc to riders right. And absolutely, if you can get up ahead of steam and safely, not ridiculous, but if you can safely maximize your top speed on the downhill approach, and then the challenge is to hold that speed through the turn. And different folks, different equipment are going to have higher comfort levels. If you do a lot of gravel racing, this is a big thing in gravel, is how do you hold your speed through loose traction? But my piece has always been to take the outside angle, don't cut to the inside, particularly because, Hottie, the inside of the curves can often be filled with water. So you got to watch for that. So you take the outside bend. On outbound, you're talking about the right-hand side of the road. You want to dig your outside foot in and lean the bike over as best you can. Trust your tires. I find this with beginning riders. They're actually more timid than they need to be. You can trust your tires. You can trust the equipment. It can do more than you think it can do. It's capable. You're running tubeless. You're running lower pressures. You're running wider footprints than we would have been doing back in the day. Slam that outside foot into the outer bank of the turn. Stay off the brakes as much as you feel comfortable. Don't look at the edge of the road and where you might go off. Look at where you want to go and try to hold that speed up the backside. And I think on each of those, it's good for 15, 30, maybe even 45 seconds of net time and maybe even more important, saving some energy expenditure.
Yeah, right foot low for a left-hand turn. That's what Nate is describing here. Okay, great. Those are great pointers there. Yeah, you can actually carry speed, and this is one of the things I was trying to coach Mrs. Hottie about. Like as she's approaching a long kind of descent like that, and there's a turn coming up, and maybe she can't see all the way through the turn. Like go down there and try to brake as late as you can, and then grab a lot of brake, and then let them go and get through the corner and carry your speed right through the corner. And especially on these two switchbacks we're talking about, Pipeline, because they go right back up the hill. And you want the more speed you can have coming out of the turns, the easier it is going to be to get going. Okay, well, the single track, folks, we're not going to get into details on the single track. Again, it's one of those areas to be ready to pass or be passed. If you have single track skills, great. It's not a long section, so your loss of time here, if you don't have great skills, is not going to be huge. It's one of those areas you can go and check out first, and you only do it the one way now, too, by the way, folks. It's just the outward bound way, so you probably should not give up too much time here, but there can be some traffic, so just be ready for that. All right, let's get to the next big feature, and that is Columbine. I think hopefully everyone knows how to climb by now, and you know where the top of Columbine is, but coming back down, again, we've got more turns and more areas where momentum can be your friend. Now, obviously, if that is a steep, harrowing descent, folks, the top section is quite rocky. You want to be careful. Again, it's one of those prepare to pass or be passed sections. But Nate, once we get back in the trees, the mountain road does a lot of switchbacks again, right? We get a lot of back and forth, and it's a pretty, again, harrowing, high-speed descent that is going to require braking, but you don't want to cook your brakes either. So get us down, talk about especially those long, wide, fast turns on Columbine and how you think people should best approach those to keep some speed.
I think you end up doing similar to what we talked about on the Pipeline section. You want to hold the safest speed you feel comfortable with. That's nice and high. You want to stay off your brakes. You talked about cooking your brakes. That's an important point. You want to give short burst grabs. If you need to scrub speed, I'd rather have you give it 3 grabs. Each grab is 2 or 3 seconds. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, than just sort of a constant drag, because that'll help keep, first of all, it's just better braking technique, but it'll also keep your brakes cool. So you want to keep the highest speed you can heading into the turns, scrub the speed you need to before the turn, and then take the bend. And for the most part, the same thing applies. Now, if you're turning to your left, you will be on the outer right-hand edge of the road, and you will, by geometry, you will not be intruding upon riders coming up at you in the other direction. And this is more or less of an issue depending on where you are in the race, if you're a 9-hour finisher or a 12-hour finisher. The challenge is those right-hand turns where the outer left line is occupied by opposing traffic. And I just was going through this with a training partner who's probably going to do a pretty fast time, but hasn't had as much time on course as I have. And one technique I found was actually to take the opposite, to take the far extreme of the right-hand bend, even at the expense of coming to what felt like a really slow speed, 5-7 miles an hour. The trade-off being that you can pick up a lot of speed because the angle of the exit is more steep. And so it was brake, 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 slow down more than I really wanted to, take the far extreme inside of the switchback, and then use that steeper gradient to bring the wheels back up to a higher speed and start pedaling. That's what I was testing on a recent training ride, and I really liked it.
And it felt probably, a lot safer than trying to go for right-hand turns out to your left and then back into the right into the apex where you've got oncoming traffic and that type of thing. That clears your mind of all that stuff. We're talking about the right-hand turns here, folks.
It feels safer. It felt a little bit frustrating because you have to bring the bike down to a bit of a slower speed than you want. But then you get this like instant surge and you're back up to 15, 18 miles an hour without actually having to pedal. And then you can pick it up from there. It's just one thought, but what you definitely don't want to have any risk is straying too far to the outside left and encountering oncoming traffic.
Yeah, and again, folks, you want to finish your braking before you have to lean your bike, if at all possible. Yeah, there are emergencies, and maybe you've miscalculated the turn, and you might have to grab some brake while in a turn. But hopefully, you've released your brakes by the time you're leaning your bike. That way, your tires have the best chance of grabbing. The knobs can do their work much better as opposed to when you have your brakes on. That's adding the wrong type of pressure to those tires, and it would actually encourage them to slide out when you're braking like that in a corner.
Hottie, another great place for the eyes mantra, the vision mantra. Let your eyes go, 6, 8, 10 feet in front of your front tire, but then let them go 200 meters up course, because you may come to a corner and just by the rhythm of who's ever dancing up in the opposite direction, there may not be anybody there. And that's fair game. If you can safely see, oh gosh, normally I've been having to take the inside right line, but on this one there's nobody there. Well, albeit go to the left. So use your eyes. It is tricky visibility in there, as you know, Hottie, because of those aspen trees, the sun sort of dancing in and out of the shadows. I would say generally, again, and want everybody to stay safe and not take risks that they don't want to take. But generally, I think that the terrain, the trail, the ruts, the rocks are more rider friendly than maybe what you'd realize if you're newer to the course, and that's something that costs you speed, right? If you've got a mile of terrain, but you're riding in fear that at any point there's a rut that's going to eat up your front tire, or you're going to come to a dramatic bend that you're not ready for, you'll just ride slower as a precaution against that unknown when that hazard, that challenge, that terrain feature may not be there.
Okay. We're going to jump way ahead now, folks, to near the end of the race. Again, a lot of Nate's tips here apply to many sections on the course, some of which we've talked about, others of which you're going to come across as you're riding or pre-riding or what have you. But I want to go to one feature in particular, Nate, and that is really what is the final turn almost on the course. It's the final dirt turn, and that is, when we turn onto the boulevard and immediately we're thrown into a rock bed. It seems like maybe it's asking too much to try and hold decent speed because we're all just going to kind of come to a grind there. But what's your line? What kind of line do you try to choose as you're coming out of that, what I love to call the gutter, and onto that rocky section on the boulevard?
So a couple things, Hottie. I don't think there's really too much of a sense of like holding momentum into that turn. But what is important is to not lose traction. And you're going from, it's kind of icky in there, but it's not vertical. You could easily be going 10, 15, 20 miles an hour as you work your way through the gutter. You want to slow down dramatically. You want to right away shift to an extremely easy gear, maybe your granny gear, and then notch it up from there if you feel you can. I have not ridden that section this year, and it, like several sections of the course, is one where from year to year the line moves, and it could be way out wide to the right. It could be straight up the gut. My memory seems to recall that in the past handful of years, the only attractive line for the first 100 meters or so is actually the extreme inside of the turn, the left. So you're making a really acute angle. You're making, more than a 90-degree turn probably to your left. So what I do in there is I just play it super safe. I will brake. I will bring myself almost to a track stand, almost to a stop. I'll make sure I'm in my absolute easiest gear. And then again, eyes, vision, look up and choose that line and be decisive. Don't wiffle waffle, don't debate. Again, I believe the last couple of years it's been an inside left line that has some of the rocks and stuff kicked out, some of the debris. Because otherwise you're trying to climb up what would amount to like softball and baseball size river rock. But you make that turn, and the most important thing is to not lose traction, not slide out, not slip a pedal, not let your rear wheel slip out to where you have to get off your bike if you don't have to. Because you should be able to climb it for the majority of riders, I'm hoping, especially with the finish so near in sight and the stoke factor high, thinking about the buckle, you should be able to climb that. And so it's actually the same thing I think about technique-wise as the super steep section of Powerline, which is maintain traction, chin, nose in the direction of the stem and handlebars, arms with an exaggerated, rowing pull-up style motion, back with your arm muscles pulling toward your chest. You want your butt and your body weight back. You want it cheating the direction of the rear wheel. You want as much body weight as possible to be sitting over that rear wheel and helping that rear wheel maintain traction, and then using your arms and cadence to pull your way up. So that's what I do. And then I would say take heart, because that we talk about the boulevard as if it's one consistent road. It ain't. It's 100 or 200 meters of impossibly chunky looking gravel with no obvious line. Then it's probably another 400 or 500 meters of still fairly rugged gravel and rocks. And then it's a smooth camp road.
All great tips there, Nate. Thanks for walking us through some great sections. Again, folks, I think in kind of these last few weeks of your preparation where you should be like tapering and taking it more easy and the big miles are gone, these are all things you can work on your own that shouldn't take too much energy out of you. Braking, turning, accelerating out of a turn. It's all worth kind of practicing in these final days, whether you're on course or on your local trails. These are just like basic mountain biker skills, and we've just tried to overlay some of these techniques onto the Leadville course itself so you kind of know where the good racing lines are and where are the spots maybe you need to be a little more cautious. Hey, you want to take some listener questions? We went on the Facebook page and polled some folks. They were excited to see you were coming on. You up for some listener questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, excellent. Let's start with Mark DeBono, and he's got two here. I'm going to answer the first one. He says, what's the best way to find your crew in the feed zones? And this is something we've remarked on a lot on the show, and that is Fatty and I swear by bright jerseys. Have your rider in a bright jersey, have your crew wearing quite obvious clothing, and of course, tell them if you can scout or get out there early, try to relay to the rider when they're at the start line or whatever, where you are in the feed zone. And that usually is a recipe for success in finding, so your rider's not wandering through the feed zone, looking around, yelling out names. They can just ride straight up to you. Or at the very least, if you have bright clothing on, unique clothing on, they can see you as you're waving your arms, and crew can see the rider on approach if the rider has something bright and very obvious, to where I can pick Nate out actually from way beyond the Twin Lakes Dam, or if I'm an alternate, because I know his helmet, I know the jerseys he's wearing. I also know he's very fast, and he's going to be there quite soon, so he's not hard to find. One for you, Nate, and I'm really interested to hear your answer to this. Mark also asked about whether to ride with a power meter, obviously with his FTP or his power adjusted for the elevation, or RPE. He's heard both, right? He's heard both arguments for riding for perceived exertion or just concentrating on his power meter. I have no idea what you use for a metric, if anything at all. What say you?
I have never used power metric and power meter at Leadville as my primary, or I would even go so far as to say like an important real-time metric in kind of pacing myself, gauging my effort, and trying to kind of make sure that I have my best day, and that I leave it all out on the course, but don't bonk, don't crash, don't suffer. That's a personal thing. I have not done it for Leadville or particularly for events that are so varied, where the terrain is just so irregular. We talked about St. Kevin's. St. Kevin's is not one single climb by any stretch of the imagination. Just the first part up to the turn has steep pitches with great traction, steep pitches with bad traction, and you're picking through rocks and running water. It's got long extended false flats, 1%, 2%. And I have just found it too challenging in real time to use the power metric in a meaningful and beneficial way. I do use it to set training goals. I do use it to look back in retrospect on a training ride or a race performance and try to deduce kind of how things went. But when I'm in the race, I'm triangulating between, first and foremost, always, how do I feel? How does my body feel? Now, I have the benefit of, so many Leadvilles and not just Leadvilles, but I've done lots of these events, La Ruta, Unbound Gravel. I am an experienced racer. And so I've got a lot of history and a lot of data points for sort of how am I feeling and what does that mean and what has that led to in prior events. The next thing I do triangulate off, and call me old school, but is heart rate. I've got enough data history to know within a few beats per minute what type of a heart rate is a good and sustainable number to see on a given section of the climb. And so, like, for instance, on St. Kevin's, despite the steep pitches, the rollers, the flat section, my heart rate is going to migrate much more slowly. Meaning, if it says, let's just pick a number that might be typical for me on race morning, 174. I know on St. Kevin's, on race day, if my heart rate says 174 and I feel good and my legs feel fresh, and I'm around other riders who seem like, in my case, a lot of them I know, who seem like they should be, I'm triangulating between those things more than power. But I can certainly envision a case where a given athlete, maybe you have a coach or maybe you do a lot of training with specific power zones. I can certainly see where that would make sense for someone. It's not me, but I guess the thing I would warn you about is, again, on race day, it can just be so different. And it's like, let's say you're coming from, you're coming from Austin, Texas, and you're a pretty experienced gravel and road racer, but you've never done Leadville. How do you know what the heck your body is going to be telling you against a number, halfway up St. Kevin's? My first choice is going to be listen to my intuition and always err to the side of kind of like caution. Once you go too far over the edge, whether it's power, heart rate, respiration, standing up out of the saddle. I mean, once you burn too many matches, there ain't no coming back. Mm-hmm. So
okay, Sean Meredith, who's in your age group, by the way, Nate. So you may or may not want to answer this question directly. I'll leave that up to you. But here's an interesting one. Says he's a first timer, but he's shooting for sub 8. Do you have any tips for a sub 8 for a first timer?
I think in thinking about Leadville and what makes it unique and so great, one of the many elements is the fact that you are in fact riding in and around lots of other riders. I mean, typically for me over the years, if I picture myself humming in and around that pipeline aid station, I in my mind I picture 6, 8, 10, 12, even I can remember earlier years 15, 20 guys. So you picture that, and that's part of the fun. And that's part of what makes Leadville a great challenge for cyclists of all disciplines and strengths. But I think for folks who are setting a time goal, they sometimes tend to overweight that factor. The key to my PR today, or the key to breaking 9 or 8 or 7 or whatever you're going, is I got to be in a fast group. It can be important. I think it's worth time. I also think that it can be a way that particularly outbound, that folks burn themselves up. If you find a group and you feel comfortable and everybody's working, well, great. Then maybe that's a source of 3 or 4 or 5 free minutes heading over to Twin Lake Dams. And I do think that's the order of magnitude. It's not a nice, fast working group through the pipeline to Twin Lake, power line to Twin Lakes. That is not worth 10 minutes at virtually any pace. It's not worth 15 minutes. It might be worth 5 minutes. It might be worth 3 minutes. So I would say, know your body, play to your strengths. If you find riding partners and lines and pace lines, go for it, but not at the expense of pushing too hard.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons my eyes opened up to Leadville when I saw and heard about it. Because I came from road racing, I went, oh, that looks like what I do in many cases, like groups moving across. But like Nate says, you got to be careful. If the group's just moving too hard, cut the cord. Like, get out of there. You're just it's going to end up costing you time. You may feel like you're moving along great, but if you're on the limit, no good. You might as well just cut the cord at that point.
And don't be tempted to take, I guess you'd call it like a hero pull. You get in that line of 6 or 8 guys, take a nice fair pull. I sometimes literally will count pedal strokes. I'll get to the front and I'll say, count, I try to keep a cadence of 90. So that's about a minute. 90 pedal strokes, Nate, and then move to the side and let somebody else do their thing.
Okay, Dale Shahan has a question about the weather and how he should be prepared. In particular, he wants to know, should he carry a rain jacket from the start, or is he just better off wearing his jersey and potentially slogging it through potential rains? Now, first of all, Nate would tell Dale, well, you don't have to do either, or you can do both, maybe is what I'm saying. Leave the jacket with your crew at the bottom of Columbine. And as you get there, look up the mountain. If it looks like rain, put it in your jersey and ride up there with it. That's a fatty approach to things. You could also do the same at the bottom of, or at the end of the pipeline in the feed there. You could have a jacket waiting for there. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. I don't know what you do, Nate. I imagine you are moving so quick you don't have to worry about the afternoon rains.
It is going to be a different answer depending on your anticipated pace and frankly just like your demonstrated history of tolerance for extreme conditions. Some people, just like the minute it's drizzling, they want coverage, they want warmth. Other folks, seem to be able to gut it out and don't want to deal with it. I would leave a lot of that worst case scenario type stuff to pick up later, and then it's just kind of a question of risk reward. From the start line, I rarely do anything in terms of warmth. I sometimes wear arm warmers. I was thinking about, I found a pair. I like to think of certain items, and arm warmers is high on the list, as quasi-disposable. So I'm not going to necessarily bring my $80 Rafa or Castelli arm warmers, my favorite pair, to the start line at Leadville. You can find, I'm not kidding, you can find really great, cheap arm warmers, 3 for $11 on Amazon Prime. And if they get tossed in the crowd, if they go in your jersey, so I'll sometimes wear very light arm warmers. I have dealt with numbness and cold hands, which seem to just right away set me off on the wrong path. I have worn like long fingered gloves, or even some type of like a thermal glove over a fingerless glove occasionally. But I would put a rain jacket of some kind, and these are light. Put it with your crew, look up at the skies. I would say if you're a 9 to 12 hour finisher, err to the side of caution. The danger zone is when you go to put it on. I mean, just you got to put it on, roll to the side and get it on. Take the 10 seconds, zip it up.
Here's one I handpicked for you, Nate. It comes from Ron Henyon, who's a good friend of the show. And he wants to know about coming off an injury, being off the bike a little bit, getting back to training a little later than he wanted to. As far as being, he's a multi-time finisher. He wants to know what the best way is to approach the race if your training hasn't been ideal, or if you're maybe riding with a lingering injury. I'm thinking about your arm brace there, Nate. How should he set his expectations going into a day like that?
2 summers ago, roughly July 1st, and at that point, actually, by my standards, I didn't have a great base of training. I had not done as many events. I was, a little bit late to the game. But I ended up having a bicep tendon tear, nothing related to riding. I actually just kind of an old man injury from lifting my bike, believe it or not, out of a training partner's pickup truck, which I don't do that much. I use a bike rack. And I had surgery on July 5th. And, I was basically staring at 35 days, all of the guidance from the experts and my surgeon in particular, was that, the recovery for this bicep tendon surgery was like 10 to 12 weeks minimum. And that didn't mean ride the Leadville 100 in 10 or 12 weeks. That meant like you can carry a bag of groceries in 12 weeks. So I'll save the details of kind of how I was so stubborn and stubborn-headed. But where I actually wasn't stubborn and where I played it really safe and smart, I think, looking back, was I didn't decide I had to do the race, but I decided it might be possible, and I took it day by day. And I did a lot of, and thank God for the Tour de France and hours of cycling content on my iPad, but I did a lot of hours on the stationary trainer, and I just focused on like controlling the things that I could control: the cardiovascular system, the oxygen adaptation. And truth be told, I didn't touch dirt that year until the Wednesday before the race, and I shocked myself that year. I actually managed a 7:27 finish. I guess I would say this: make up your mind if you're going to go to the start line and do the race. If you do it, commit. Be willing to make adjustments to your equipment, your race strategy, your crew strategy, your gear, your clothing, braces, things of that nature. And then just bank on your years of accumulated base. It sounds like you're a multi-time Leadville racer. Lean heavily on that foundation of base. Try to get it primed up as much as you safely can with zone 1 and zone 2 sessions on the trainer, and give it a go and give yourself some grace to, maybe this is a year you get your buckle, but it's not your fastest time, but take it as an opportunity to experience things through a different lens.
All right, folks. Hey, great questions from all. I want to thank you for submitting those on the participants page. By the way, if we didn't get to your question, look for maybe a direct reply in the comment section there. We'll try to get to everyone there. Nate, we want to thank you for coming back on the show and providing your advice and answering listener questions. It's always good catching up with you, and we're going to see you in Leadville, obviously.
Hottie, thanks for having me. I love coming on. I will be in Leadville. I'm here now. I'm training. I'm soaking in the lack of oxygen, and the stoke factor is high. You gave me a little ribbing there for my my generational talk, but the stoke factor is high. I was thinking about it. Everybody talks about the metrics and the power, and TSS stands for, what does that stand for? Total stress score. That sounds so horrible. So I decided I'm going to have TSS as the total stoke score, and it's going to be how am I training and how much fun am I having, and that's why I keep coming back, because it's always there. The Leadville community is fantastic, and Hottie, you and the podcast and the listeners have been a big part of it. So thank you.
Thanks again to Nate Whitman. What we hope you got out of this show are some tips on technique and a few spots where you could overlay those ideas on the course. We couldn't get to every corner and climb where these techniques could be used, but the general ideas are still there for you. And Nate talked about them, like keeping your momentum. Momentum is your friend. Establish your speed and try to keep as much as you can, even when the course throws an obstacle your way. All right, everyone, next stop, Leadville, Colorado. Take care of yourself. Good luck in your final preparation, and we'll see you on the start line at 6th and Harrison.